Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. I'm your host, and tonight we're heading down south, where the towns are small, the roads are empty, and something is very, very wrong. Before we start, I need to tell you something. Every single story you're about to hear actually happened. Real people, real places, and some of them, they're still out there. Now, imagine you're just doing your job. Maybe you're delivering packages. Maybe you're driving through the backwoods. Everything seems normal. And then you see it. Something that makes your blood run cold. Something that shouldn't exist. What would you do? Who would you tell? And more importantly, would anyone believe you? Tonight, I've got 8 stories from the Deep South. People who went to work one day and came back different. A guy who found out wild animals were way smarter than they should be. And someone who discovered their entire town was hiding the darkest secret you could imagine. But here's the scary part. These things are still happening, right now, in towns you might have driven through, in places that look perfectly normal during the day. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at small southern towns the same way again. Let's begin. My name is Vernon Dupree, but everyone calls me Vern. I've been trapping feral hogs for 19 years across Mississippi, Louisiana, and parts of Arkansas. Started when I was 28, after wild hogs destroyed my uncle's soybean crop 3 years running. I've caught over 2,000 hogs in that time. I know their behavior better than most people know their own dogs. I can tell you which trails they use, what time they feed, how they communicate. I've been charged, bitten, and thrown by boars that weighed more than me. I've tracked them through swamps in the middle of the night and spent weeks in the woods setting trap lines. But what happened in Wilkinson County in August 2023 made me realize I didn't know hogs at all, and I'm never going back into those woods. The job started normal enough. I was a big marvel of there. I've certainly working with any time with woks. I know that they work water. The job started normal enough. A farmer named Dale Hutchins called me about his corn and soybean fields getting destroyed. Said he was losing thousands of dollars a week. He had 600 acres, and the hogs were hitting him hard every night. It was brutal hot that summer. Mississippi was in a drought, the worst in 30 years. Everything was dried up, and the hogs were getting desperate. Dale said he'd tried everything: electric fencing, hunting, poison. Nothing worked. He needed someone who could set proper trap lines and clear them out for good. I drove out there on August 15th. The heat was so bad the air looked wavy over the fields. Dale showed me the damage. Whole sections of crops just torn apart, rooted up from the ground. He'd also lost 2 dogs that week. Just vanished. He figured the hogs got them, but he hadn't found bodies. Walked the property that first day, marking good spots for traps. The woods bordered his fields on 3 sides. Thick pine forest with dense undergrowth. Perfect hog habitat. I found their trails easy enough. Deep ruts in the dried mud where they traveled. But something felt off right away. The tracks were everywhere, but I didn't see any fresh scat. No wallows. Hogs love to make mud pits in the summer, but I couldn't find a single one. It was like they were there, but they were being careful not to leave evidence. I set up 12 trap cages across the locations. It was no property there, big ones, reinforced steel with spring-loaded doors. I also mounted 8 trail cameras on trees along their main paths. The cameras were good ones, Bushnell trophy cams with infrared for night vision. They'd take a photo every time they detected movement. I baited the traps with fermented corn, which hogs can't resist. Then I left them alone for 3 days. That's standard procedure. Let the hogs get comfortable with the traps before they trigger. When I came back on August 18th to check the cameras, I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the first trap. The door was open, the bait was gone, but the trigger mechanism hadn't been tripped. The trap was still set. Someone, or something, had reached in, taken the bait, and left without setting it off. I checked. All 12 traps. Same thing. Every single one. Bait gone, traps still set. I pulled the SD cards from the cameras and went back to my truck. It was mid-afternoon, probably 100 degrees. I sat there with my laptop, going through the footage, expecting to see the usual stuff. Hogs sniffing around, maybe smart enough to avoid the traps. What I saw instead made my hands go cold despite the heat. The footage from the first camera showed 8 hogs approaching one of my traps around 2 a.m. on August 17th. They moved in a group, which is normal, but then they stopped about 10 feet from the trap, just stood there. One of them, a big boar, probably 400 pounds, walked up to the trap alone. It circled the trap once, twice, then it stood up on its hind legs. I'm not talking about rearing up for a second. This hog stood upright like a person. It balanced there, looking at the trap from different angles. Its front hooves moved over the cage, touching the bars, the door, the trigger plate, testing everything. Then it lowered back down, walked to the entrance, and used its snout to knock the bait out through the gaps in the bars. Never triggered the door. The other hogs moved in and ate the bait while the big one watched. I went through all 8 cameras. Every single one showed the same thing. Hogs standing upright, examining my traps, figuring them out, working in groups. Some would distract, while others disabled the mechanisms. On one camera, I counted 12 hogs working together to flip an entire trap cage on its side so they could access the bait from underneath. But the worst part was the sounds. Normal hog vocalizations are grunts, squeals, aggressive huffing. These sounds were different. Longer, more complex. Almost like they were talking to each other, coordinating. And their eyes. In the infrared footage, animal eyes usually shine bright. That's the tapetum reflecting light. But these hogs' eyes glowed differently. A dull red color that seemed to come from inside their heads, like embers. I sat in that truck for an hour, watching the footage over more, near tradition forward there. I sat in that truck, watching the footage, the Lloyds on the trap. It were to the tone. My first thought was that the cameras were malfunctioning, bad SD cards, corrupted files. But the footage was clear. The timestamps were correct. This was real. I called Dale and told him I needed to reset with better traps. Didn't mention what I'd seen. I didn't know how to explain it. I drove into town and bought the most secure trap cages I could find. Reinforced doors, multiple trigger systems, buried anchors. Spent my own money. Then I relocated all 12 traps to different positions and adjusted the cameras to watch wider areas. I checked them 24 hours later. Every trap was empty. Bait gone. But this time, they'd done something worse. The new footage showed the hogs watching me while I set up. I hadn't seen them, but they were there in the tree line, standing perfectly still. At least 20 of them, just watching. 1 camera. The big boar walked right up to the lens, stared directly into it. Then it raised one front hoof and made a gesture. It looked exactly like it was beckoning, waving me closer, like a person would. I drove back to Dale's property that word, and smokely that was being good, which is known of them that I rolled a tell the most arrange. I drove back to Dale's property that word was also like a person would, but either time that jumps was horetically redly one, and the region the camera. I drove back to Dale's property that links to in many of the community and find that a cover of termally. I drove back to Dale's property that was mostly powerment, which walked right up to the lens, stared directly into it, like a person, wave, which it looked exactly like it was beckoning, waving me closer, like a person, wave. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning, which is known of them that I roll to tell me most arrange, like a person, wave, which it looked exactly like it was beckoning, that a cover of termally. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning, which is known of them that I roll to tell me most arrange. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. which it looked exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning, which is no latham that I roll to tell Mimosa range. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. Smokely into the air, or work, that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. I drove back to Dale's property that was most exactly like it was beckoning for working them. Bench to Dale's property that afternoon and walked the woods where the cameras were positioned. I found the second missing dog halfway through, a 90-pound mastiff named Duke. Dale had shown me his picture. Duke was dead. Been dead maybe 2 days. But the body had been moved, arranged. Someone had propped it against a tree in a sitting position, front legs crossed, head tilted to the side, like it was watching the trail, like it was waiting for something. Around the body were hoof prints, dozens of them. But mixed in with the prints were marks in the dirt, deliberate marks. I took pictures with my phone. They looked like letters, symbols. I couldn't make sense of them, but they were intentional, too precise to be random scraping. I called Dale immediately, told him we had a serious problem. He said he'd drive out, but before he could, he called me back. "Vern, you need to get to the north pasture right now." I drove across the property. Dale was standing at the fence line, white as paper. In the field were 3 dead calves, young ones, maybe 6 months old. They'd been killed within the last few hours, but they hadn't been eaten. They'd been cut open, gutted, and they were arranged in a line, all 3 of them pointing directly at my truck, which was parked 100 yards away. Dan's was shaking. "What the hell is doing this?" Drawback because I didn't know. This wasn't animal behavior. This was a message. That night, I made a decision I regret. I decided to hunt them. I'd been a trapper my whole career, not a hunter, but I had a rifle, a .308 Remington with a thermal scope. I figured if these hogs were that smart, I needed to see them in action, study them the way they were studying me. I went into the woods around midnight on August 21st. The thermal scope lit up the forest in shades of green and white. Hot things showed up bright. Cold things were dark. Within 30 minutes, I spotted them. There were at least 40 hogs moving through the cover. I strained there, just to patience. I ferned along in the world of television that was nowhere that he called work. The therming minutes I found, there were the least 40 hogs without a side. But they weren't moving like animals. They were organized. Some were in front, spread out like scouts. Others moved in a line behind them. A few hung back on the sides, flanking positions, like soldiers. Full back I followed them from a distance, staying quiet. They were hunting something. I could tell by how they moved, slow and deliberate, checking the area, communicating with those strange sounds. Then I saw what they were after. A deer. A young buck. It was trying to stay ahead of them, but the hogs kept cutting off its escape routes. They were herding it, driving it towards something. The deer broke into a clearing and ran straight toward an old sinkhole, a collapsed section of ground about 10 feet across. The deer tried to stop, but it was going too fast. It fell in. I heard it hit the bottom, maybe 12 feet down. It screamed, that's the only word for it. Deer don't usually make sounds like that. Hogs gathered around the edge of the sinkhole. They looked down at the deer, then they started making those sounds again, long, rolling grunts that almost sounded like words, like they were talking about what to do next. Then they started pushing dirt and rocks into the hole. They were burying it, alive. I watched through the thermal scope, frozen. The deer kept screaming. The hogs kept pushing debris into the hole. Methodical, patient. They worked for maybe 20 minutes until the sound stopped. My scope picked up something behind me. Devoid of the hogs had left the group. It was 30 feet away, standing there, watching me. It was the big boar from the camera footage, and it charged. I barely made it to a tree, dropped my rifle, grabbed the lowest branch and pulled myself up. The boar hit the trunk so hard, the whole tree shook. I climbed higher, maybe 15 feet up, and wrapped my arms around the trunk. The boar didn't leave. It paced below me, circling, staring up. Then it made a sound, a deep, rumbling grunt that carried through the woods. At the sinkhole, stopped and turned. Then they came. Within minutes, 40 hogs surrounded my tree, but they didn't try to knock it down. They didn't charge or ram it. Instead, they spread out. Some laid down in positions where they could watch me. Others left and came back dragging branches and logs. They were building barriers, making it harder for me to escape when I came down. They were trapping me. And then they just waited. Hours passed. The night got colder. My arms cramped. My legs went numb. I kept thinking they'd get bored and leave. But they didn't move. They took turns staying awake. Some would sleep while others watched. Organized shifts. The never moved. It sat directly below me, staring up with those red glowing eyes. By dawn, I'd been in that tree for 8 hours. I was so thirsty I couldn't swallow. My hands wouldn't grip properly anymore. I was going to fall soon. Blinds, you hogs, knew it. I could tell by how they positioned themselves. They were waiting for me to drop. I made a desperate choice. I still had my pistol, a .45 on my belt. I drew it and fired into the air. 3 shots. The hogs didn't run. They reacted like they'd been expecting it. Some moved to the sides. Others came closer to the tree, flanking me. I had 3 rounds left. I aimed at the big boar and fired. Hit it in the skull. It dropped instantly. For a moment, everything stopped. The other hogs stared at the body. Then they moved in. They started eating the boar. It wasn't frenzied. It was surgical. They weren't eating randomly. They were targeting specific parts. The heart, the eyes, the brain. I watched them remove these organs carefully, almost gently. And as they ate, they made sounds. Sounds that formed shapes in the air. Syllables. Hunter. Hunter. Were saying hunter. I don't remember much after that. I heard gunshots from somewhere else. Dale and his farmhands coming to find me. The hogs scattered into the woods, but not in panic. They left in formation. Organized retreat. Dale and his crew got me down. I was barely conscious, dehydrated, hypothermic. They took me to the hospital in Woodville. Testament the police investigated, they found everything I described. The arranged dog, the buried deer, the barriers around my tree, the body of the big boar. They sent the boar's body to Mississippi State for analysis. The report came back 3 weeks later. Its brain was 3 times normal size for a feral hog. Its vocal cords had structures that shouldn't exist in pigs, formations similar to primate anatomy. And its stomach contents showed something impossible: plant matter that had been chewed, partially digested, and then reconsumed. That's food preparation behavior, tool use behavior. Blinking. Wildlife officials went into those woods and killed 63 hogs over the next month. Only 8 had the brain abnormalities. The rest were normal. Nobody could explain why. Environmental contamination was ruled out. Prion disease didn't fit the symptoms. Genetic mutation didn't make sense for only some of them. No one knows what hogs after that. I do pest control now. Insects, rodents, nothing large enough to look back at me. Buffering 400 acres of his property, the section where this happened. He won't go near it. Other trappers have been brought in. 3 have been injured in what they describe as coordinated attacks. Equipment gets sabotaged, traps get disabled, trail cameras get destroyed. The forest is marked as a high-risk wildlife area now. Hunters who go in report feeling watched. They find animal bodies arranged in patterns. They hear sounds at night that almost sound like speech. I monitor hunting forums online, obsessively. I've documented 15 other locations across Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, where trappers report similar behavior. Hogs that seem too smart. Hogs that work together in ways that don't make sense. I don't know what's happening in those woods. Maybe it's mutation. Maybe it's disease. Maybe it's something we don't have a name for yet. But I know one thing for certain. They're learning. And I think they remember me. My name is Deshaun Mitchell, and I've been a roadkill removal technician for the Alabama Department of Transportation for 6 years. I know that sounds like a strange job to most people, but somebody's got to do it. Every morning, before the sun comes up, I drive a 40-mile stretch of State Route 19, collecting animal carcasses off the highway. Deer, possums, raccoons, coyotes, whatever didn't make it across the road the night before. I've seen thousands of dead animals. I've scraped them off hot asphalt in the middle of July. I've pulled them from drainage ditches in freezing rain. I thought I'd seen everything. But what I found on Route 19 in October 2023 wasn't just roadkill, and what was collecting it wasn't human. Chung 19 cuts through some of the most isolated parts of rural Alabama, 40 miles of pine forest and swampland, with maybe 3 houses total. Most nights, the only traffic is long-haul truckers and the occasional lost tourist. My shift starts at 5 a.m., but the real work happens in those first few miles between mile markers 14 and 17. That's where most of the animals get hit. Something about that stretch, maybe the way the road curves, maybe the thick woods on both sides. The deer just don't see the cars coming. Monday morning, October 16th, I was running my usual route. The sun wasn't up yet, just that grey pre-dawn light that makes everything look flat and colourless. I had my coffee, my heavy-duty gloves, my DOT safety vest. Standard Monday. Then, I rounded the curve at mile marker 15, and my headlights hit something that made me slam on the brakes. Deer, 14 of them, spread across a 3-mile stretch of highway like someone had arranged them there on purpose. Now, I've worked bad nights before. Storm comes through, deer panic and run across the highway. You might get 5 or 6 casualties. But 14? In one night? On a quiet Sunday? That alone was weird. But it got worse when I started loading them into my truck. Every single deer had the same injuries. Their legs were broken, not crushed like you'd see from a vehicle impact, but snapped at clean angles, like someone had bent them on purpose. Their abdomens were opened up, surgical clean cuts, and specific organs were missing. Kidneys, liver, parts of the digestive tract, removed with precision. I've seen what vehicle impact does to animals. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely. Buffering it to my supervisor, Bill Henderson. He called the state wildlife office. They sent out a guy named Martinez who took photos and samples, asked me a bunch of questions about poaching and animal cruelty. He seemed concerned but not alarmed, said he'd investigate and get back to me. I went home that night thinking maybe it was some sick poacher with a taste for deer organs. Weird, but at least human. Confiscate then it happened again on Wednesday. Same stretch of road, same injuries. This time it was 8 deer, 3 raccoons, and a coyote. All of them opened up the same way. All of them with those precisely broken legs. Sluggish brought more. Tuesday of the next week brought more. Always between mile markers 14 and 17. Always in the pre-dawn hours before I arrived. Always with those same surgical cuts and broken limbs. Martinez came back out, took more samples, looked more worried this time. He said the cuts were extremely unusual and that the pattern of organ removal didn't match any known animal predator or human poaching method. He wouldn't tell me what that meant exactly, but I could see it in his face. He didn't know what he was looking at either. But I started noticing something else, something that kept me up at night. There were skid marks all over that section of highway, fresh ones appearing every night, tire tracks showing where drivers had swerved hard, panicked braking, vehicles going off onto the shoulder. But here's the thing, there were no corresponding carcasses at those locations. Whatever drivers were swerving to avoid, it wasn't there when I arrived an hour later. Something was appearing in the road, something that made people swerve, something that disappeared before dawn. I requested the dashcam footage from my truck and from the state police who patrolled Route 19 at night. It took some pushing. Bill didn't want to bother with it, said I was overthinking things. But eventually, he pulled the files. I watched the footage in the DOT break room on a Tuesday afternoon. Trooper Williams's dashcam from the previous Friday, 4:37 a.m. His cruiser was heading south on Route 19, approaching mile marker 16. The road was empty. Then, maybe 200 feet ahead in the headlight beams, something appeared. It didn't walk into frame. It didn't emerge from the trees. It just appeared, standing in the middle of the southbound lane. The shape was wrong, roughly human-sized, maybe bigger, but the proportions weren't right. The limbs were too long. When it moved, and it did move, shifting its weight as the cruiser approached, the joints bent in ways that made my stomach turn. Trooper Williams hit his brakes and swerved. The dashcam caught maybe 3 seconds of footage as his cruiser passed the thing. It didn't run. It didn't flee. It just stood there, watching the vehicle go by. Then, as the cruiser's taillights illuminated the road behind him, the shape moved. Fast. Impossibly fast. It crossed from the center of the road to the tree line in what looked like a single step, covering 20 feet in less than a second. The footage ended. I sat there in the break room, my coffee gone cold, watching those 3 seconds over and over again. I showed Bill. He watched it once, said the video quality was too poor to make out details, suggested it might be a bear or a homeless person. But I could tell he was unsettled. He approved better cameras for that section of Route 19, said it was for safety documentation purposes. The following Monday, Bill changed my schedule. He wanted morning collection completed earlier, so he put me on a 5 a.m. start instead of my usual 5:30. I didn't argue. The overtime pay was decent, and honestly, I wanted to see that stretch of road earlier in the morning. I wanted to know what was really happening out there. Unmistake 30th. My truck's clock read 4:47 a.m. as I drove south on Route 19. The sky was still dark, just the faintest grey line on the eastern horizon. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the white fog line and the wall of pine trees on either side. Then I saw it, standing in the middle of the road at mile marker 16, maybe 60 feet ahead, holding something in its hands. I didn't slam on the brakes this time. I slowed down gradually, my heart hammering in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. But I kept moving forward. 50 feet, 40, 30. It was roughly 7 feet tall, skeletal thin, like something that had been starving for years, covered in something that might have been matted hair or moss, or some combination of both. Its limbs were too long, especially the arms, which hung down past where its knees should have been. The hands had too many joints in the fingers. I counted at least 4 knuckles per finger, maybe more. It was holding a dead raccoon in one hand. The other hand was inside the carcass, pulling something out with those impossibly long fingers. 20 feet away now, close enough to see its face. Except it wasn't a face, not really. The features were in the wrong places. Eyes too high on the head, spaced too far apart, reflecting my headlights like an animal's. A mouth that extended past where cheeks should end, stretching almost to where ears would be on a human. 10 feet. It turned its head to look at me. The neck rotated farther than any neck should rotate, the head swiveling almost 180 degrees while the body remained facing forward. We made eye contact. I don't know what was no. I feel really close about. The general monkey was turned at the forward. I don't know what was no, but it is not really close about. The neck was not mating the way that wasn't to the fore. It was motor that root forward to the muful impefore. I cooked the month of the pipes. I wasn't fighting. We made eye contact. I don't know what was no, but I told to me that root forward to the moful impefore. It's serious, which is pating from a waiter. It worldly heading the moth, while the body remain face. It wielding the month and the body remain face. We made eye contact. I feel that was like this forward, which was no tentacle. I paid him the members, and the forward putting from the moves. We made eye contact. I was pert of the back to room forward. I stand out of the body remain face, which was motor that root forward to the moful impefore. The 445 that root head, I turned to me that root forward, which was less to the death. The redealing the electric mo that will not kept. I found the 440 was too long position, the pomace that root forward. We made eye contact, the going the moth. Facing forward, the head swiveling, I don't know how else to describe it. Those too high, too far apart, eyes locked onto mine through the windshield, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. Not just fear, recognition. Like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me. One step, impossibly fast, and it was gone into the darkness beyond my headlight beams. I heard branches breaking in the forest, moving away fast, but I never saw it disappear. It was just there, and then it wasn't. I sat in my truck in the middle of Route 19 for 5 full minutes, shaking, before I could make my hands work the radio. Billing didn't believe me at first, not until we installed the upgraded cameras and started reviewing the footage. Always in the same section of road. The cameras captured it standing in the road, waiting. We watched it collect carcasses, animals that had been hit by vehicles earlier in the night. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. It knew what it was doing. But here's what made Bill finally shut down that section of road. The thing was getting bolder. On November 3rd, the cameras caught it approaching a stranded vehicle. Some poor bastard with a flat tire pulled over on the shoulder at mile marker 15. The footage showed the thing emerging from the trees, walking up to the driver's side window, peering inside. The driver never saw it. He was in the back seat, probably looking for his spare tire. The thing tried the door handle. When it didn't open, it moved to the next door, then the next. The driver must have heard something, because suddenly the footage showed him scrambling into the front seat and flooring it, driving on a flat tire at 40 miles per hour until he was out of that section of road. November 9th, 5:15 a.m. I got a call on my radio. Elderly woman, stranded vehicle, Route 19, mile marker 16. I almost didn't respond. I should have told Bill to send state police, should have made up some excuse. But she was an elderly woman stranded alone in the dark, and it was my job. So I went. I found her standing outside her Ford sedan, shaking, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She was maybe late 60s, grey hair, tourist plates from Ohio. She looked terrified. "My car," she said as soon as I pulled up. 10 minutes ago. Something tall. It was looking at me through the window, trying the door handles. My blood went cold. "Get in my truck, now." As I was helping her into the passenger seat, 30 feet away at the tree line, barely visible in the glow of my work lights, just standing there, watching us. I got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The woman saw it too and started screaming. The thing stepped out onto the road. It didn't rush us. It walked, almost casual, like it had all the time in the world, like it knew we couldn't really escape. Without the truck in drive, and floored it. For the first few seconds I thought we were okay. Then I saw it in my side mirror. It was running, keeping pace with us. My speedometer read 55 miles per hour, and this thing was running alongside my truck in the drainage ditch, matching our speed with a loping stride that covered 20 feet with each step. The woman was screaming. I was screaming. I pushed the accelerator down further. 60, 65, 75. It kept pace for another mile, those impossibly long limbs pumping in fluid motion. Its head turned toward us as it ran, watching us through the windows with those two high eyes. Then, at mile marker 13, it stopped. Just stopped running and stood in the middle of the road behind us, getting smaller in my rearview mirror, watching us leave its territory. I drove that woman straight to the state police barracks in Meridian. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I barely breathed until we were under the fluorescent lights of the police station parking lot. They investigated. Oh, they investigated thoroughly. State police, wildlife officials, even some guys in suits who didn't identify which agency they were from. They found footprints in the drainage ditch where the thing had run beside my truck. If you can call them footprints. They were elongated impressions, six-toed, with a stride length between 18 and 20 feet. They found hair samples snagged on roadside vegetation. The DNA analysis came back inconclusive, wouldn't match any known mammal. The lab report said the samples contained genetic markers inconsistent with terrestrial organisms, whatever that means. They examined the woman's Ford. Scratch marks on the door handles and window frames 7 feet up from the ground, made by something with narrow fingers that had too many joints. On November 15th, DOT closed Route 19 between mile markers 14 and 17. Official reason? Emergency road maintenance. There was no maintenance. They put up concrete barriers and road-closed signs. State police patrol that area 24/7 now, but they won't explain why to anyone who asks. Forbes. I transferred to a different region. I work Route 65 now, up near Birmingham. I refuse to work any dawn shifts. Bill approved it without asking questions. I think he was relieved to have me off Route 19. The woman I rescued moved back to Ohio. I tried to call her once to see how she was doing. Her daughter answered and said her mother doesn't talk about what happened. Said she has nightmares. Said she won't drive alone anymore. I'm in therapy now, twice a week. My therapist specializes in trauma, but I don't think she really believes what I'm telling her. She thinks I saw something, sure, but she thinks my brain filled in impossible details. Stress and fear and darkness playing tricks. Maybe she's right. I don't know anymore. Whistleblood. What I do know is this. I can't drive at dawn or dusk anymore. Something about that in-between light makes my hands shake on the steering wheel. I take the long way around to avoid any isolated stretches of highway. I always keep my doors locked. Always. Abandonment. And I've been doing research. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I search online for similar reports. You'd be surprised what you find if you know where to look. Rocks highways in Mississippi. Backwoods roads in Georgia. Isolated routes through Tennessee swampland. Always the same pattern. Animal mutilations, missing organs, surgical precision. Tall shapes seen on the road at dawn. Vehicles swerving for no apparent reason. And sometimes, not often but sometimes, missing persons. Hunters who went into the woods and never came back. Hikers who vanished. Bodies found weeks later. Autopsies sealed. Funerals closed casket. There are more of them out there. I'm sure of it now. Living in the places humans don't go. Hunting the edges of our world where the roads cut through their territory. Using our highways as their hunting grounds. And we just keep driving through, never knowing what's standing in. The darkness just beyond our headlights, waiting for us to swerve, waiting for us to break down, waiting for dawn when we're most vulnerable. Route 19 is still closed. The barricades are still up. But hunters in that area report finding animal carcasses in the forest near the closed road. Same broken limbs, same surgical cuts. Game cameras catch something tall moving through the trees at night. In late November, a hunter disappeared in those woods. They found his body 3 weeks later. The autopsy report is sealed. The funeral was closed casket. I still work for DOT. I still collect roadkill. But now, every time I see skid marks on the highway, every time I find an animal carcass with injuries that don't quite match vehicle impact, I wonder. One wonder what else is out there. in the dark places between the mile markers. And I wonder if that thing on Route 19 is still waiting, still watching the road, still collecting. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been delivering propane for 11 years now. I drive a tanker truck through East Texas, filling up tanks for folks who live out in the country, farms, ranches, houses too far from town to get natural gas lines. It's honest work, physical, but I like being on the road, seeing different places every day. I've handled frozen valves in winter storms, dealt with angry dogs, and worked in 100-degree heat. I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me. But what happened in January 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in those woods. Some things out there don't want to be found, and some things are watching us back. I've been running the same route through the hill country for 7 years. I know every dirt road, every driveway, every property. Most of my customers are good people, farmers, retirees, families who wanted space and quiet. The route takes me about 50 miles from town, deep into areas where cell service cuts out, and the nearest neighbor might be 2 miles away. My truck carries 1,500 gallons of propane. I've got all my certifications, never had an accident, never had a complaint. My boss trusts me with the most remote deliveries because I'm reliable. I show up, I do the work, I don't cause problems. It was a Tuesday morning, first week of January. Cold for Texas, maybe 35 degrees with a hard wind. I had 12 stops that day. The Kessler farm was number 8, about 15 miles from the nearest town. I'd been delivering there for 3 years. Nice old couple. Mr. Kessler always came out to chat while I worked. Mrs. Kessler usually brought me coffee. I pulled up the long gravel driveway around 2 in the afternoon. The house sat in a clearing, old but well maintained. Their propane tank was around back, maybe 50 feet from the tree line. Forest surrounded the property on 3 sides, thick pine and oak, the kind of woods that go on for miles. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch, such as, "I'd been certainly help. I really don't know of a kingdomy for the tree line. It was a so property, but as well as watting jumping, but is more than Beck." Mrs. Kessler came out on the 4th, the kind of woods that go on for miles. The farm that was Maiding Head, but it was never had a bud. It was not particularly complete, but I released Mrs. Kessler and do it from short. Mrs. Kessler came out, the woods that came to the woods. Forest was provided in 4th, but Mrs. Kessler came out, the formers would provided in froms, but with over imorthing from poting stat. They're old curring there from there, but have also lay the wood strocked around the woods. The property was being refued, but I absolutely worked. It was 25 degrees, the copping covered with 55 degrees, and then 55 degrees, the temple of the 4th. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch, but then find the woods trussed with it. The formers were writting without the woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the 4th, the kind of woods that go on for miles. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch, but Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch. The formers would provided in froms, but I created that Mrs. Kessler and blowing together with woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the 4th. The formers were writting without the woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch, but then find the woods trussed with it, the kind of woods that go on for miles. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch, but then find the woods trussed with it. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch. The formers were writting without the woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the 4th. The formers were writting without the woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch. The formers were writting without the woods. Mrs. Kessler came out on the porch. The formers were writting without the woods. The parking tank was number 8, about 15 miles from the nearest town. The Kellers south surrounded the property on 3 sides, thick pine and oak, the kindness of way out on the porch, but she didn't wave like usual. Mr. Kessler wasn't there at all. I backed the truck up, unreeled the hose, and started the fill procedure. It's routine. Check the gauge, connect the line, open the valves, monitor the flow. Takes about 15 minutes for a tank that size. The wind had died down and it was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No birds, No squirrels rustling in the leaves, just silence. That's when I heard it. Branches breaking. Deep in the woods, maybe 50 feet back. Something moving. I looked up. At first I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. Then I saw it. Something behind a thick oak tree, watching me. I could only see part of it. Grey-white skin, like it had never seen the sun. An arm, if you could call it that, wrapped around the tree trunk. The arm was too long, too thin, and the way it bent, it had too many joints. I froze. My hand was still on the fill nozzle, but I wasn't thinking about the propane anymore. I was staring at that tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It moved. Pulled back behind the tree, then I saw it running deeper into the woods. Not running like a person, not running like any animal I'd ever seen. It moved wrong, like its legs bent in places they shouldn't. Whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, then it was gone. I finished the fill on autopilot, my hands shaking. I coiled up the hose and walked to the house. Mrs. Kessler was waiting on the porch. She looked old suddenly, scared. Pornography. Mrs. Kessler, I need you to sign the receipt. My voice sounded steady, but I felt sick. Camouflage. She took the clipboard. Her hand was shaking too. Did you see something out there? She asked quietly. I don't know what I saw. She looked past me toward the woods. You saw the Watcher. It's been in those woods for 3 months now. She paused, and her eyes filled with tears. My husband went out there with his rifle in November. We haven't found him yet. I felt cold all over. What? Calibration. We reported it. Police came out, searched for days. Nothing. Frank just vanished. But I know what took him. I've seen it watching the house at night, standing at the tree line, just standing there for hours. I didn't know what to say. I got in my truck and left, looking in my mirrors the whole way down the driveway. I called the sheriff's department when I got cell service. They confirmed Mr. Kessler was missing. Case was still open. They didn't sound hopeful. Over the next week, I asked around. Other drivers, customers, the guy at the feed store. Turns out 3 other people had gone missing in that area over the past 6 months. 2 hunters and a hiker. Nobody ever found. All within a 10-mile radius of the Kessler place. I talked to had seen something. A tall figure in the woods. Always watching, never approaching. Some folks had found strange marks scratched into trees near their property lines. Deep gouges in the bark, in patterns that didn't look natural. I should have quit the route right then, but I needed the job, and part of me didn't believe it, couldn't believe it. Fallen. 2 weeks later, I had to go back to the Kessler farm. Mrs. Kessler refused to leave her home, and she needed propane. I drove out there, my stomach in knots the whole way. This time, I saw it clearly. I was filling the tank when I heard movement. I turned, and it was there, 30 feet away, crouched behind some brush. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, even crouching. Impossibly thin, like skin stretched over a skeleton. Its arms and legs were wrong. Too many segments between the joints, like extra elbows and knees that bent at strange angles. The skin was grey-white, almost see-through in the daylight. I could see the bone structure underneath. The head was the worst part. Elongated, like someone had stretched it. I couldn't make out the features clearly at that distance, but the shape was wrong. Not human. Not animal. Something else. Alone. It was holding something. A piece of cloth, dark blue. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pull out my phone. I zoomed in and took a picture. The thing didn't move, just stood there, holding that cloth up like it was showing me. When I looked at the photo later, my blood went cold. The cloth was a shirt. The same shirt Mr. Kessler was wearing in the missing person poster at the sheriff's office. Charge. Turbulence. Showing me proof. Showing the next 2 weeks. I delivered to 6 more properties in that area. Every single one of them had stories. Handprints on windows, long fingers with too many joints, scratching sounds on roofs at night, dogs and cats disappearing. 2 families had already moved out. Stabilized. One customer, a guy named Dave, showed me footage from his trail camera. 3 in the morning, something standing 10 feet from his house, staring at his bedroom window. It stood there for 47 minutes without moving, just staring. Dave and his family had been asleep inside, completely unaware. "We're leaving," Dave told me. "I don't care what it costs, we're getting out." I couldn't blame him. The last delivery I made in that area happened on a Thursday afternoon, January 25th. The sun sets early in winter, and it was already getting dark when I arrived at the property, a small ranch about 12 miles from the Kessler place. The propane tank was near the barn, about 100 feet from the house. I started the fill at 4:15 p.m. The sun was orange and low on the horizon. The temperature was dropping fast. Safeguard. I heard the sound. Branches breaking, footsteps that were too heavy, too far apart. Something big moving through the woods. Then it stepped out of the tree line. Forgiveness. 40 feet away. Fully visible for the first time. Coinbase. 8 feet tall, skeletal thin, with that grey-white skin pulled tight over visible bones. Its arms had 3 segments instead of 2, shoulder to elbow, elbow to wrist, then another joint before the hand. The fingers were 10 inches long, with too many knuckles. The legs bent backward at one joint, forward at another, like an insect's legs. The head was cylindrical, smooth except for deep-set black eyes that caught the dying light. The mouth was a vertical slit down the center of the face. No nose that I could see, no ears. It was covered in mud and leaves, stuck to its skin like camouflage, like it had been lying in the forest, waiting. It didn't make any sound. It just looked at me. Then it started walking toward me. I ran, dropped the fill hose, left it spraying propane into the air, and ran for my truck. The thing moved fast, covering 40 feet in seconds with this horrible loping gait, its too many jointed limbs carrying it across the ground like a spider. It reached the truck, threw myself inside, slammed the locks down. The thing arrived a second later. It examined the truck like it was trying to figure out what it was. Running those long fingers across the windows, testing the door handles. Then its face pressed against the driver's side window. I was 18 inches away from it. Conflicts, the vertical slit opened. Inside were rows of thin, needle-like teeth. No tongue. The throat looked wrong, like it went straight down forever. It breathed on the glass, and the condensation it left behind was oily, left streaks that didn't evaporate. It tapped on the window with one finger. Then it pointed toward the woods. The message was clear. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. The thing circled the truck for 20 minutes. I could hear it, the footsteps on the gravel, the scraping sound when its fingers dragged across the metal. It always stayed where I could see it, watching me through the windows. Walked back toward the tree line. Before it disappeared into the woods, it turned around, pointed at me, then pointed at the ground. "I know where you are." That's what it was saying. "You're marked." I waited another 30 minutes before I got out. The propane was still spraying. I'd wasted about 200 gallons. I didn't care. I shut down the system, threw everything in the truck, and drove away so fast I left tire marks in the gravel. I went straight to the sheriff's department, told them everything. They sent officers out to investigate. They found footprints, 22 inches long, 6 inches wide, 6 distinct toe marks. They collected samples of the oily residue from my truck window. The lab report came back strange, organic compounds that didn't match any known animal. Throughout the area, over the next week, those cameras captured dozens of images. The watcher moving through the forest, watching properties, approaching homes after midnight. Height variations. The analysis suggested there might be 2 or 3 different ones, maybe more. The sheriff's department put out a warning about dangerous wildlife and told people to stay inside after dark. That was it. That was all they did. I told my boss I wouldn't deliver to that area anymore. He assigned the route to other drivers. 3 of them quit after their own encounters. By February, the company officially abandoned the route. They claimed it wasn't economically viable, but the internal memo said high-risk area. Frontal 4 more people went missing between January and March. Search teams found scattered clothing and personal items, but no bodies. Never any bodies. People are leaving. Property values crashed. By April, that whole area was practically empty. Wildlife officials can't explain what the Watcher is. Some people say unknown primate. Some say prehistoric human subspecies. Some say something that was never supposed to exist. Position Hamas have been captured. No bodies have been recovered. The Watchers are still out there. I can't work rural routes anymore. The PTSD is bad. I take medication now, see a therapist twice a month. My boss moved me to suburban deliveries only. Houses in neighborhoods, good cell service, people around. But I found something online. Forums where other drivers and utility workers share stories. Delivery guys from Louisiana, linemen from Arkansas, meter readers from Oklahoma. All of them describing the same thing. Tall, pale figures that watch from the woods, that take people sometimes, that leave marks. It's happening in a lot of places. Has been for a long time, probably. We just don't talk about it. If you work out in the country, in the remote areas, keep your eyes open. If you see something watching you from the tree line, don't investigate. Don't try to get closer. And for God's sake, don't follow it into the woods. Because once it marks you, once it knows where you are, it doesn't stop watching. And sometimes, it doesn't stay in the woods. My name is Bobby Ray Hendricks, and I've been fixing small engines for 27 years. I own a little repair shop in rural Georgia, just me and my tools, fixing lawnmowers, chainsaws, generators, whatever folks bring in. I've rebuilt thousands of engines. I know the smell of old gas, the feel of a worn carburetor, the sound a two-stroke makes when the timing's off. I've pulled all kinds of crazy stuff out of machines, rocks, kids' toys, even a dead squirrel once. But what I found in September 2023 wasn't supposed to be possible. It wasn't supposed to be alive. My shop sits on Highway 41, about 10 miles outside of Valdosta. It's a metal building with a concrete floor, always smelling like oil and sawdust. I've got workbenches along both walls, parts bins everywhere, and a small office in back where I do paperwork. Most days are pretty simple. Someone drops off their mower, I fix it, they pick it up. Been doing it so long I could rebuild a Briggs & Stratton engine in my sleep. It was a Tuesday morning, September 12th, when Carl Morrison brought in his chainsaw. Carl's a logger, uses his saw every day. "Won't start anymore, Bobby," he said, setting it on my bench. "Sounds wrong when it tries to turn over, like it's grinding on something." I told him I'd take a look, figured it was a seized piston or bad fuel. Carl left, and I got to work. I pulled the starter cord a few times. He was right, it made a weird sound. Not mechanical, almost wet, like something sticky moving inside. I unscrewed the housing to check the cylinder. That's when I saw it. Blockers. Inside the engine, wrapped around the piston, was something that looked like meat. Not wood chips or plant stuff from cutting trees, actual flesh. Red and pink, with thin strands like muscle fiber woven through the metal parts. I thought I was seeing things. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. It was still there. The flesh was warm. The engine had been off for hours, sitting in Carl's truck, but this stuff was body temperature. I touched it with a screwdriver. It was soft, and it moved. Just a little twitch, like when you poke raw chicken and the muscle fibers contract. Drop the screwdriver. There was more. The fuel line had something running through it that looked like blood vessels, tiny red tubes branching through the rubber. The air filter had tissue growing into it, like roots growing into soil, except it wasn't roots. It was organic, animal. Bishops. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just staring. This wasn't contamination. This wasn't mold or some weird fungus. This was meat and blood inside a machine. The engine was still warm, and I swear I could feel a pulse through the metal housing. I called Carl. "Where'd you last use this saw?" "Out near the old Blackwell factory," he said. "Been cutting timber on that property." "Why?" Him back. "Policing." Over the next week, 3 more customers brought in equipment. Every single piece had the same problem. Lost a lawnmower from Jim Parker, muscle tissue wrapped around the blade spindle. A generator from Sarah Chen, nerve-looking stuff running through the electrical wiring like tree roots. A weed trimmer from Miguel Santos, something that looked like blood vessels growing through the fuel tank. All of them made sounds when I worked on them. Not engine sounds, breathing sounds. Slow, wet breathing, like something asleep. The generator hummed with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. The lawnmower's engine turned over on its own while I was checking the spark plug. No pull cord, no battery, just started itself for 3 seconds and stopped. Jumhubash told me his mower had started by itself the day before. "It was in my garage, Bobby. Engine just fired up at 2 a.m. Woke up the whole house. I went out there and it was running in circles, nobody touching it. On at 3 in the morning and ran all night. I unplugged it, Bobby. I pulled the damn plug out of the wall and it kept running, making electricity out of nothing." Orders. All 5 customers lived within 3 miles of the old Blackwell agricultural equipment factory. The place shut down in 1987. Nobody goes there anymore. I spent that night researching, found old newspaper articles in the library archives. In 1986, there was an accident at Blackwell. Chemical spill during some kind of experimental manufacturing process. 3 workers died. The article said they died from integration with machinery, whatever that meant. The factory closed a year later. A local historian, she wrote that Blackwell had been working on something called biomechanical engineering, trying to make machines that could repair themselves using organic material. The project went wrong. People who entered the factory afterward disappeared or came out different. One guy was found 2 days later, wandering Highway 41, talking about machines that breathed and metal that bled. Bandwidth. I should have burned those 5 pieces of equipment right then. I should have called someone. But I'm a mechanic, you know? I fix things. I wanted to understand what was happening. That was my mistake. Friday night, I stayed late to clean up. Around 10 p.m., my security camera caught something. I watched the footage the next morning. At 10:47 p.m., the chainsaw started running. No fuel in the tank, chain spinning at full speed. At 10:52, the lawnmower's engine turned over. It was completely disassembled. Carburetor off, blade removed, air filter on the bench 6 feet away. Still turned over. At 11:03, the generator powered on. Lights in my shop started flickering, and they moved. Lawnmower didn't just run, it rolled. Across the concrete floor, slow and steady, toward the corner of the shop. The chainsaw vibrated across the workbench, pulling itself with the chain. The generator walked on its power cord, lifting the cord like legs, dragging itself across the floor. They were moving toward each other. I got to the shop Saturday morning and found them in the corner, arranged in a perfect circle. All 5 pieces of equipment, chainsaw, mower, generator, trimmer, and a blower I'd forgotten about. All running, all connected by strands of organic tissue that had grown out of their housings overnight. The tissue formed a web between them, pulsing like veins carrying blood. Theological. They'd made a network. Clang, a blowtorch. I wasn't thinking straight, I just wanted them gone. Determined the second I fired up the torch, they reacted. The lawnmower's blade started spinning. It didn't even have a blade attached, but the spindle was turning so fast it screamed. The chainsaw's chain ran at full speed. The generator surged, and every light in the shop exploded. I ran outside. Churred the chainsaw first. It burned, but the smoke wasn't normal. It was thick and black, full of tiny particles that floated like dust. The particles landed on other equipment in my shop. customer machines, my own tools. By afternoon, I saw the same early signs: tissue growing on a hedge trimmer, blood vessels forming in a pressure washer's engine, while I spreading. That's when I noticed my hand. I'd cut myself earlier in the week working on the chainsaw. 3 small cuts on my palm. Now there were thin black lines under my skin, spreading from the cuts up my wrist. They looked like veins, but they weren't veins. They were fibers, growing through my tissue like roots through dirt. I felt them moving. I ran to my truck, turned the key. Nothing. I popped the hood. The engine was covered in flesh. Not on it, growing through it. Muscle wrapped around the alternator. Blood vessels running through the radiator hoses. Something that looked like a lung expanding and contracting in the engine block. The whole thing was breathing. Constituted the other vehicles in my lot. 6 customer cars waiting for pickup. Every single engine was infected, transformed, alive. I heard sounds from inside my shop. Dozens of machines starting at once. Through the window I saw them moving, lawnmowers rolling, chainsaws dragging themselves, trimmers walking on their drive shafts. They surrounded the office door, the door where I kept my truck keys. They were keeping me there. I ran, left everything and ran on foot down Highway 41. Behind me I heard them coming, metal scraping on asphalt, engines running, the chainsaw's chain rattling as it pulled itself along the road. They were following me. I made it 2 miles to the Murphy farmhouse. Old man Murphy called 911 while his wife wrapped my hand in a towel. The black lines had reached my elbow. Fire trucks came, hazmat team. They burned my shop to the ground, used some kind of chemical accelerant. I watched it burn from the ambulance. At the hospital, they cut the infection out of my arm. 3 surgeries. The doctors said the tissue was
like nothing they'd seen before. Part plant, part animal, part synthetic. They sent samples to the CDC. Never heard back. The health department investigated the Blackwell factory, found the whole place contaminated. Machines throughout the building showing organic growth. In the basement, they found rooms full of infected equipment arranged in circles, just like mine, growing, breeding, making more. They sealed the factory, put up fences. Nobody's allowed within a quarter mile. Stop. Over the next 6 months, there were 23 reported cases across Georgia and Alabama. Equipment acting strange, machines starting on their own, organic material found inside engines. Most of it traced back to equipment manufactured at Blackwell or repaired with old parts from there. Prosecute. My shop's gone. Insurance called the fire suspicious, wouldn't pay out. I can't work anymore. Nerve damage in my hand from the surgeries. I moved in with my sister in Tennessee, living on disability. I can't be around machines now. Can't even use a toaster without my hands shaking. The sound of a lawnmower in the neighborhood sends me into panic attacks. Documented 43 cases now. I follow online forums for mechanics and repair shops. People are reporting the same things I saw. Equipment acting alive, organic material in engines, machines that move on their own. But nobody's listening. The CDC won't return my calls. The EPA says I'm suffering from trauma. Meanwhile, penetrating radar shows the contamination at Blackwell has spread into the soil, into the groundwater. There's no cleanup plan. Too expensive, they say. Too big. The supply chain. Used equipment, refurbished parts, salvage yards. Someone buys an old mower at a yard sale, takes it home, and 3 months later, it's breeding the infection into their other machines. It's going to reach the cities eventually. Atlanta, Birmingham, Nashville. Millions of machines, millions of engines. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. I still have nightmares about those 5 machines in my shop, arranged in a circle, connected by living tissue. Still hear the sound of that chainsaw pulling itself down Highway 41, following me. Sometimes I wonder if the infection is still in me, if they got it all, or if there's some piece left, too small to see, growing slowly in my bones. Much anymore.
If you work on small engines, if you're a mechanic, a repair tech, anyone who touches machines, check your equipment. Look for tissue that shouldn't be there. Listen for sounds that aren't mechanical. And if you find it, don't do what I did. Don't try to fix it. Burn it all, before it spreads.
My name is Tammy Broussard, and I've been a livestock auctioneer and barn manager for 16 years. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Cajun country, learned the auction chant from my daddy when I was 12, and got my Louisiana auctioneer license the day I turned 21. I've sold everything from prize-winning bulls to sick calves nobody else wanted. I've handled aggressive animals, dealt with dishonest sellers, and worked through floods, hurricanes, and even a barn fire back in 2015. But what happened at my auction barn in March 2024 made me leave Louisiana forever. Because some things aren't supposed to exist, and when you find out they do, you can't just go back to normal life. My outside Thibodeau, right off Highway 1. We run cattle sales every Tuesday, sometimes moving 300 head in a single day. The main building is a big metal structure with 20-foot ceilings, holding pens that can handle 50 cattle at once, and an auction ring where buyers sit on bleachers while I call out bids. I know every inch of that barn, every squeak in the metal rafters, every shadow the overhead lights make. I knew that place like I knew my own home. It was a Tuesday morning in early March when Gerald Toussaint brought in 6 cattle to sell. Gerald was a third-generation rancher, 60-something years old, tough as leather. I'd known him my whole life. But that morning, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hands were shaking when he signed the paperwork. The cattle were worse. They were panicked, eyes rolling white, crashing into the fence panels hard enough to bend the metal. I've seen spooked cattle before, but this was different. These animals were terrified of something. That snow ran down their sides, climbed on them. But worse were the marks on their necks. Every single cow had the same injury. 3 puncture wounds in a triangle pattern, about 2 inches apart, scabbed over but still fresh enough to see. The wounds were clean, almost surgical, too precise to be from any farm equipment or barbed wire. "Gerald, what happened to these animals?" I asked. He wouldn't look at me. "Something's been getting into my barn at night. I can't stop it, can't even see it clearly. But I'm not keeping these cattle anymore. Just sell them, Tammy, please." I should have asked more questions. I should have refused the sale. But Gerald was desperate, and I needed the commission. So I put those cattle through the ring and sold them cheap to a buyer from 2 parishes over. Over the next 2 weeks, 4 more farmers brought in cattle with identical wounds. Triple punctures on the neck, claw marks on the body. Animals so terrified they'd injure themselves trying to escape the pens. All the farms were within 20 miles of each other. Something was spreading. "Hey Bear," the veterinarian who inspects livestock for us. He examined the neck wounds under a magnifying glass, took samples, ran tests. What he found didn't make sense. "These wounds are designed to access the jugular vein without killing the animal," he said. "There's scarring underneath that shows this happened multiple times. Whatever made these marks was feeding on them, drinking their blood." He paused. "And Tammy, there's a chemical in the wounds, an anticoagulant, keeps the blood flowing. But it doesn't match any known species. Not mosquitoes, not bats, not anything in my database." One farmer, old Jacques Landry, told me he'd seen something in his barn at 3 in the morning. "Like a massive spider," he said, "but wrong. It was moving along the ceiling. I turned on the lights and it was gone. But I heard it, clicking sounds, almost like it was talking." He was crazy. I thought all of them were overreacting, until it came to my barn. I house livestock overnight before sales, sometimes 42 before, sometimes 43. I thought it was really required that to still before the barn.
I had known that would make the contraries before the selves. I thought it was moving along the ceiling until it came to my barn. I housed livestock overreacting until it came to my barn. I housed started like the finger of the end. I thought it was Chrissy because I'd know along with me, but it is not just Mudge's work. I thought it was very Chrissy. I thought it was trade-like, almost 40 in which is going to be a math. I thought he was Chrissy if I heard. I thought he was killing the morning. I howed he was long. I thought it was clicking. I thought all of them as surfed and likely. I house me a bit more. We have a ground with a great flets to begins to me. I thought it was interesting of 4 that tempt him to discuss with me to me. Sometimes 40 or 50 cattle in the holding pens. On a Thursday morning in late March, I arrived at 6 a.m. to find 12 cattle with fresh neck wounds. The triple punctures, the claw marks, all of it. Whatever was attacking farms had followed the cattle to me. I immediately checked the security cameras. I have 4 cameras covering the barn interior. The footage from the night before made my blood run cold. At 2:47 a.m., something entered the frame from above. It was moving along the ceiling, 20 feet up, crawling across the metal rafters. The camera quality wasn't great, and the thing stayed in the shadows, but I could see enough. It was big, maybe 6 or 8 feet across. It had multiple legs, at least 8, moving in a way that looked like a spider, but wrong. Too smooth, too coordinated. As I watched, it lowered itself down to the cattle pens on strands of something that looked like silk. It attached itself to a cow's neck and stayed there for 40 minutes, not moving, just feeding. Then it climbed back up to the ceiling and repeated the process with another cow. Over 6 hours, it fed on 8 different animals. I watched that footage 5 times. Each time, I felt sicker. I called my maintenance crew and told them to search the rafters. 3 men went up on scissor lifts with flashlights. What they found up there still gives me nightmares. There was a nest in the rafters, 15 feet across, made from silk-like strands, wood pieces, animal hair, and bones. Small animal bones. Cats, possums, raccoons. Some of the remains were fresh. Some were old, reduced to fur and skeleton. But the worst part was the eggs. 23 egg sacs, each the size of a football, translucent enough to see shapes moving inside. My crew counted them twice to be sure. Several looked like they'd already hatched, the casings torn open and empty. Wigel said he saw something moving in the shadows while they were up there. Something big. But when he pointed his flashlight, there was nothing. Just darkness and silk strands hanging down like curtains. I closed the barn immediately, called every pest control company in 3 parishes. None of them would take the job. One guy looked at the photos of the nest and just said, "That's not an insect, that's not anything I've ever seen. You need wildlife control. Or the military, I don't know." I called the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries. They said they'd send someone out in 3 days. 3 days. I couldn't wait that long. I had to go back into the barn one more time. I needed to make sure all the livestock were out, move them to a neighbor's property until this was resolved. I went in alone at 2 in the afternoon, broad daylight. I thought I'd be safe. I was checking the last pen when I heard it. A clicking sound, like someone snapping their fingers rapidly but deeper. It echoed through the barn coming from above. I looked up. It dropped from the ceiling 20 feet away. I've seen spiders my whole life. Louisiana has plenty of them. But this thing wasn't just a big spider. It was wrong in every way. Covered in thick, it had 8 legs, but each leg was as thick as my thigh and ended in something that looked almost like a hand. Multiple joints, claws at the tips. The body was segmented, bulky, the size of a horse. The head had at least 10 eyes, all different sizes, and mandibles that extended forward like curved blades. 2 feet long, sharp. It made that cliss, almost like it was trying to talk. Then it charged. I ran for the barn door. That thing moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. I could hear it behind me, the legs hitting the concrete floor like hammers, the clicking getting louder. I made it through the door and slammed it shut. The creature hit the door from inside with enough force to crack the wood. I heard it moving around, scratching at the walls. Then the sound moved up. It was climbing. I looked up and saw it squeezing through a ventilation gap near the roof. The opening was maybe 2 feet wide, but it compressed its body and pushed through. Then it crawled down the exterior wall toward me. I ran to my truck, almost made it. Something hit me from above. Silk strands, sticky and strong, covering my arms and chest. I tried to pull free, but the more I struggled, the more tangled I got. I fell to the ground. The creature dropped down beside me. It was so close I could see the individual hairs on its body, see the way its mandibles moved, opening and closing. The tips were sharp and arranged in groups of 3, the same pattern as the wounds on the cattle. It leaned over me. The mandibles extended toward my neck. I could smell it, like rotten meat and chemicals, like nothing natural. I heard a gunshot, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Gerald Toussaint was standing 20 feet away with a shotgun. He fired again, and the creature recoiled, making that horrible clicking, hissing sound. Dark fluid sprayed from its body. It turned and moved back toward the barn, impossibly fast, despite being injured. Gerald ran over and cut the silk strands off me with a pocket knife. His hands were steady now, steady in a way they hadn't been when he'd brought those first cattle in. "I knew it would come here," he said. "I've been watching your barn for 3 days, waiting for it." By the time the sheriff arrived 15 minutes later, the creature was dead inside the barn. Blood loss. They took photos and video before anything could be moved. The thing weighed over 600 pounds. The sheriff called in state wildlife officials, then federal people I didn't recognize. They took samples, measurements. They were talking in terms I didn't understand. Before one of them told me later they'd never seen anything like it. It had structures that looked like lungs, real lungs, not the book lungs that spiders have. Its circulatory system was too complex, its brain was too large, and its DNA had sequences that didn't match anything on Earth. They destroyed the nest, found and burned 15 of the 23 egg sacs. 8 were missing, already hatched. They demolished my barn 2 days later, bulldozed the whole thing and burned the rubble, said it was contaminated, said it was a biohazard. They paid me for the property, but it was half what the place was worth. Wildlife officials found 2 more nests in abandoned barns within 10 miles. Both were empty, recently abandoned. These things were smart enough to know when they were in danger, smart enough to move. Blackjack. I sold what was left of my business and moved to Oklahoma. Couldn't stay in Louisiana, couldn't even stay in the South. But it didn't matter. Over the next 6 months, there were 14 reported sightings of similar creatures across Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. Livestock deaths from unknown predators increased 300%. Several pets went missing. A 7-year-old boy disappeared for 3 days. They found him alive, but he won't talk about what happened. Just draws pictures of things with too many legs. I monitor news reports from across the South every day. I've documented similar cattle wounds in 8 other states. Always the same pattern. Triple punctures, anticoagulant in the wounds, animals too terrified to be sold. I have chronic arachnophobia now. Can't even look at a normal house spider without my heart racing. I'm in therapy twice a week. Sometimes I still hear that clicking sound in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up convinced there's something on my ceiling. Gerald considered a hero in Thibodeau. They wrote articles about him in the local paper. But he doesn't sleep well either. He told me he sometimes sees shapes moving on his roof at night. Large shapes. He keeps his shotgun loaded by the bed.
Scientists still don't know what these things are. They can't classify them. They don't match any known species. Some people think they've been hiding in deep caves or remote swamps for thousands of years and something drove them out.
Some think they migrated from somewhere else. Some think they're something worse. I don't know what they are, but I know they're spreading, and I know that 8 of those eggs hatched before we found the nest. 8 of those things are out there, probably grown now, probably making nests of their own. People in rural areas across the South report hearing clicking sounds at night, finding silk strands on their trucks and houses, seeing large shapes moving on rooftops after dark. I left the livestock business forever. I can't go back. I can't walk into a barn without remembering what I saw in those rafters, without imagining something dropping down from above. Some people say I'm paranoid, that I overreacted, that it was just one creature, just a freak accident of nature. But I've seen the reports, I've tracked the patterns, and I know the truth. There are hundreds of them out there, maybe thousands, and they're getting bolder. Leggings. If you work with livestock anywhere in the South, check your barns. Check your rafters. Look for silk strands and missing animals. Listen for clicking sounds at night. And if you find triple puncture wounds on your cattle's necks, don't do what I did. Don't wait. Don't try to sell them. Don't bring them anywhere near other animals. Checkpoints. Just run. Because once they find you, they don't stop hunting, and there's nowhere dark enough, nowhere isolated enough that they can't follow. Swallowing. Prejudice. That the hard way. Alphabetical. And I'm still learning it every night when I check the ceiling before I can fall asleep. I've been a meat cutter for 19 years. I know every muscle, every bone, every cut. I can tell you if beef came from a steer or a heifer just by looking at the marbling. I can break down a whole hog in 40 minutes flat, like what came in that truck. My name is Tommy Vickers. I manage the meat department at the Piggly Wiggly in Oakdale, Georgia. Population 892. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, and most folks are related somehow. I start work at 4 a.m., always have. That's when the delivery trucks come. October 17th, 2023, Tuesday morning. Dark outside, cold for Georgia. I was alone in the back, waiting for the refrigerated truck from Atlanta. It arrived right on time. The driver helped me unload. Beef, pork, chicken, everything normal, everything on the manifest. Then he pointed to one more pallet in the back corner. "Almost forgot that one," he said. It was wrapped in black plastic, not our usual clear wrap. The label had our store's address, but it wasn't on my paperwork. "This isn't on the manifest," I said. "Sometimes the paperwork's wrong. It's going to your address, so..." He was already climbing back in his truck. I signed for it. Stupid. I should have refused it right there. The pallet was ice cold, properly refrigerated, had to be meat. I wheeled it into the cutting room and grabbed my knife. Black plastic peeled away easy. Forbidden inside were what looked like deer carcasses, already butchered into primals, the big cuts you break down into steaks and roasts. We got deer during hunting season sometimes. Hunters would bring them in, pay me to process them. But something was wrong. I've butchered 1,000 deer. I know what they look like inside and out. The rib cage was too narrow. The bones were too smooth. The bones within into them it's first. I know what they look like. The cuts was refer them before. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The bones were free. The bones were free. The bones were too marrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I felt that. I show to be friend. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The bones were smooth. The bones were tree smooth. I feel path of the rib cage was like a freeze, too marrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. The rib cage was too narrow. I know what they look like. My bones were too smooth. The femur, the thigh bone, was perfectly straight. Deer femurs curve. These weren't deer. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes just staring. My hands were shaking. See, I know human anatomy too. You cut meat long enough, you understand skeletal structure. Doesn't matter if it's a cow or a pig or a person. The bones don't lie. I pulled out my phone and called the delivery company. 20 minutes on hold, then a supervisor told me they had no record of any extra pallet. Must be a mistake. Send it back with tomorrow's truck. I called my district manager. He was annoyed I woke him up. Tommy, just dispose of it properly and file a contamination report. It's probably spoiled meat from another store. Sir, I think this might be. I don't care what you think. Dispose of it. I'll deal with the paperwork. Confiscated. He hung up. I couldn't throw it away. If I was right, if I was actually right, this was evidence. This was someone's body. So I called Sheriff Pritchard. Pritchard had been sheriff for 22 years. He'd known me since high school. Good guy, fair, everyone trusted him. He
showed up 30 minutes later in his personal truck, not the squad car. "Show me," he said. I took him to the cutting room, showed him the meat, showed him the bones. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Tommy," he said quietly, "this is deer meat. You're seeing things. Must be the early shift getting to you. When's the last time you slept?" "Sheriff, look at the bones." "I'm looking. It's deer." His voice was firm now. "I'll take care of this. Go on home. Get some rest." "But," "Go home, Tommy." Tempered the pallet into his truck himself. I watched him drive away. Something felt wrong, really wrong. I checked the security footage from the loading dock. It showed Pritchard arriving, showed us talking. But when it got to the part where he loaded the pallet, just static. 3 minutes of corrupted video. Security cameras don't just corrupt randomly. Just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe Pritchard was right. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd made a mistake. 19 years. I know bones. The next week, something else started happening. Mrs. Henley came to my counter. She owns Henley's Diner downtown. Sweet old lady, makes the best peach cobbler in 3 counties. She's 78 but moves like she's 50. "Tommy," she said, smiling, "I need the special cut, like last month." I stared at her. Special cut. Her smile faded. "Don't play dumb, honey. The special meat." "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." "Look, we've been getting it for 3 years. Your boss knew. Don't pretend you don't know. Just give me what I pay for." "I really don't." She walked away angry. 2 days later, Mr. DeWitt came in. Retired fire chief, 81 years old, still chops his own firewood. "Need the tender meat," he said. "You know the kind." "Sir, what specifically?" He got irritated. "The special order. Cash payment like always." "I don't have any special orders." He stared at me hard. "You better figure it out, son." Then he left. 1940 I stayed late and went through my predecessor's files. Jerry had been the meat manager for 12 years before he retired suddenly and moved to Florida. I'd only been manager for 2 months. I found a ledger hidden under the false bottom of a filing cabinet, handwritten entries, dates, names, cash amounts, but no product descriptions, just special order, over and over. On the last page, in Jerry's handwriting, "Do not question source. Do not refuse customers. Follow instructions or leave." My hands were shaking again. I started researching. Late at night, after work. Couldn't sleep anyway. Oakdale had a weird number of missing person cases. Not locals, drifters, hitchhikers, homeless people passing through on Highway 441. 25 years within 30 miles.
Nobody reported them, because nobody knew them, who was never mate. Nobody reported them because nobody knew them, who was never mate. Nobody reported them because nobody knew them, who was never mate. Nobody reported them because nobody knew them, who was never mate. She for the member, and she said the moment, that was a bit member was Sir 5. He was a social through, but he said the moment. She listened, that his move some mader.
She did the filled about segnatly. She twould fing out. But his nove me, but there she was properly. She took the moments that have a first made her, and the moment. She was rejected. She said, well, she said the moment of the thirst first. She said the moment that he was in favement remembered together. She was completed, but is the first button. She phoned me, this is what she want, she was report. She said that she was completed, that he was probably was business material. She said the moment when the first made a buildament, she said the moment and the moment. She was probably was moving. She said the moment, she was within she first. She said, well, she was probably. She said the moment when the first made a buildament, she said the moment when the first made her. She said the 28 was numelinchi, that he was save the first per turn. She said the 28 was movement she has been cerned. She said the 28 was movement she has been cerned. She said the 28 was movement she has been cerned. She said the 28 was movement she has been cerned. 30 miles. Viability-ated, because nobody reported them, because nobody knew them. But I noticed something else. The people asking for special meat, Mrs. Henley, Mr. DeWitt, the mayor, the Baptist preacher, the bank president, they were all over 70, and they were all healthy, energetic, almost unnaturally strong for their age. My grandmother was 89. She walked 3 miles every day, still drove, still cooked Sunday dinner for the whole family. She ate at Henley's Diner 4 times a week. I went to see her on Sunday. Grandma, I said, what's the special meat? She won't sew, she was over 4 player. What's white? Actually white. Who told you about that? Nobody, I figured it out. She said that, she said a moment, she was overfull. She had a doubt. Who called figured it out? She was a long time. Then she started crying. Oh, Tommy, you weren't supposed to know. Jerry kept it quiet. Why couldn't you just... She stopped, took a breath. It's medicine, baby. Old medicine. Keeps us strong, keeps us healthy, keeps the town alive. What kind of medicine? She looked at the floor. The people we use, they're people nobody wants, nobody misses. Drifters, addicts, people passing through. We give them peace, no suffering, and they give us life. I felt sick. You think Oakdale survived when every other small town died? She continued. We made sacrifices, hard choices, for the good of everyone. Grandma, what are you saying? You know what I'm saying, Tommy. You already figured it out. That's why you're here. I stood up, had to get out. Where are you going? She called after me. State Police, FBI, I don't know, anywhere. Barber believe you, and even if they did, she looked at me with sad eyes. You'll destroy this town, everyone you know, your family, me. I left anyway. My truck wouldn't start. I checked under the hood. Someone had cut the spark plug wires. My phone had no signal. Not low signal. No signal at all.
I tried to walk out of town. Made it to Highway 441. A police car pulled up beside me. Pritchard. "Get in, Tommy." "I'm just taking a walk." "It's 3 a.m. Get in the car." 3 other vehicles pulled up. I recognized them all. The mayor, completely focused to an owl. 3 other vehicles pulled up. I recognized them all. Wanted them death could have focused. 3 other vehicles pulled up. I recognized them all. Wanted them death could have focused. 3 other vehicles pulled up. I recognized them all. I recognized them all, but is only shorted. "It's 3 a.m. Get in the morning. I just taken a walk." She said, "Cam aren't you working?" 3 of them. She give a public shit. My place was for the short. 3 other vehicles pulled up. I recognized them all. Wanted them death could have focused. She said the 28 may be made not later. She didn't felt. I hope to the short. Had to walk up back behind me. Parking. Pritchard. Recognized them all. The mayor, the fire chief, Mrs. Henley. "Get in the car, son," Pritchard said again. I got in. They took me to my own series. But again, they took me to my own series. Trick it me head, I seen. Later and an air. Sat me down at my kitchen table. 7 of them, including my grandmother. She said, later give her the journeyway, but then she didn't show them police. 7 of them, including my grandmother. She said my challenges, she said self. They took me to my own house, sat them, including my grandmother. "We're not going to hurt you," Pritchard said. "We're offering you a job." "I don't want it." "Hear us out first." So I listened. What choice did I have? They explained everything. The system. Once a month, they picked up someone from Highway 441. Someone alone. Someone nobody would miss. They took them to the old meatpacking plant. Been abandoned since 1987. Clean kill. No pain. Professional butchering. Distribution to the town's elders. It started when the town was dying, the mayor said. 36 years ago. Silas Creech found an old book of folk remedies. He tried it. It worked.
He shared it with others. And look at us now. We're thriving. "You're murdering people," I said. "We're surviving," Mrs. Henley snapped. "We're making hard choices so our town can live. Those people we take? They were already dead inside. Drugs, mental illness, no hope. We give their death meaning." "Tommy," my grandmother said softly, "Jerry made $60,000 a year doing this, plus benefits. You could pay off your house, send your kids to college. I don't have kids. Not yet, but you could. You could have a good life here, be part of something important. And if I say no?" Nobody answered. Negativity. Pritchard finally spoke. "You've got 24 hours to decide." Then they left. I waited until 2 a.m. Then I broke into the old meatpacking plant. The front was boarded up, but the loading dock door was unlocked. Inside, industrial lights still worked, refrigerators humming, butchering equipment, stainless steel tables, and bodies. 3 in the main refrigerator, already butchered, wrapped in plastic. I found a box of wallets and phones in a back office. IDs, pictures. Not all drifters, some had families. I saw a missing person poster on Facebook for one of them, a girl from Tennessee, last seen at a gas station in Macon. They'd lied.
They weren't just taking the forgotten anymore. Then I heard crying. There's a cold storage room in back. A woman's voice, begging. Please, my kids need me, please. I opened the door. She was maybe 30, tied to a chair. When she saw me, she screamed. I'm here to help. Please don't kill me, please. I'm not going to kill you. I untied her. She could barely walk. I gave her my truck keys. I'd fixed the wires earlier. Told her, don't stop. Go to the state police. Tell them everything. What about you? Be right behind you. She left. I went to the plant's electrical room, found the main breakers, killed power to every refrigerator. Thousands of pounds of product would spoil within hours. I went to the office, found filing cabinets full of records, names, dates, 36 years of documentation. I started a fire, and I pulled out my phone, set it to Facebook Live. My name is Tommy Vickers, I said to the camera. I'm in Oakdale, Georgia, in the old meatpacking plant on Route 9. What I'm about to show you is real. I walked through the facility, showed everything, the bodies, the equipment, the schedule board with tomorrow's victim's name. Investigators named everyone involved, every name I knew. Sheriff Pritchard, Mayor Collins, Mrs. Henley, the preacher, the fire chief. Commemorate. I heard trucks pulling up outside. 67 people have been murdered here over 36 years, I told the camera. The whole town knows. Some participate, some just look away. But everyone knows. The door burst open. Pritchard and 6 others rushed in. Everyone knows, I repeated.
Then they tackled me. They kept recording. Blessed. The video went viral. 3 million views in 2 hours. Subsection State Police raided the town by dawn. FBI by noon. In the hospital 3 days later. Severe burns, smoke inhalation, broken ribs where they'd beaten me, but alive. Arrests. My grandmother was one of them. She died in jail 4 months later. Just aged suddenly. Looked 99 in days. The medicine was real, I guess, or they all just believed it hard enough that it worked. The town collapsed. Everyone left who wasn't arrested. Property value went to zero. Businesses closed. Kepler. Last I heard, population was under 200. I'm in witness protection now. Different state, different name. I can't cut meat anymore. Can't even look at a grocery store butcher counter without my hands shaking. But I sleep better than I did in Oakdale. Well, most nights. Some nights I dream about the schedule board, about all the names I didn't see in time. And some nights I think about what my grandmother said, about the other towns, the ones still doing it, still surviving while everywhere else dies. I've sent reports to the FBI about patterns I've noticed, missing persons, towns with unusually healthy elderly populations. 4 towns so far match the pattern. No investigations have been opened. Maybe they don't believe me, or maybe they don't want to know. Either way, I check the news every morning, looking for missing person reports along certain highways, watching for the signs, because they're still out there, still hunting, still feeding. And nobody wants to believe that the nice old lady who makes peach cobbler could be a monster. But I know. Investigators are people are capable of when they're scared of dying. I know what they'll do to survive. And I know I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, because they know I know. Brightness, President, protect their own. My name is Denise Holloway, and I've been driving school buses for Wilkinson County District in Mississippi for 22 years. I got my commercial driver's license back in 2002, right after my youngest started kindergarten. I wanted a job where I could be home when my kids got off school, you know? The pay wasn't great, but the hours worked, and I liked the kids. Over 2 decades, I've driven through ice storms, dealt with fights on the bus, handled medical emergencies, even talked down a kid who brought his daddy's gun to show his friends. I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me.
But what happened in January 2024 on my morning route made me question my own mind, and it cost me everything. Myself at 6:15 a.m., picking up 23 kids from farms and trailers scattered across the back roads of Wilkinson County. It's dark that early in January, real dark, and cold. The kind of cold that seeps into the bus even with the heat blasting. I know every stop, every pothole, every dog that'll chase the bus. I could drive it with my eyes closed. Route 7, they call it. Been the same for decades. I drove was a 2018 International, nothing fancy. Yellow paint scratched up from tree branches on narrow roads, black vinyl seats patched with duct tape, a CB radio that crackled more than it worked, cameras mounted above the front windshield and one pointing down the aisle. District installed them 5 years back after some parent complained about bullying. Everything I did was on camera. That's important to remember. January 15th, Tuesday morning. Temperature was 28 degrees, which is bitter for Mississippi. I started the bus at 6:10, checked my mirrors, tested the lights. Normal routine. First stop was the Henderson farm, then the Morrison trailer, then a long empty stretch before the Caldwell place. But that empty stretch had a stop once, years ago. The old Pritchard house, set way back from the road, been abandoned since I started driving. The family moved away or died off, I never knew which. The district kept it on the route map, but marked it inactive. That morning, as I approached that empty stop, I saw something in my headlights. A little girl, standing right where kids used to wait. She was maybe 7 years old, wearing a dress that looked homemade, brown fabric with yellow flowers, way too thin for the weather. No coat, no backpack, just standing there in the dark. I stopped the bus, hit the brake, opened the cigow. Another bus with a bus, opened the door, and cold air rushed in. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" I called down to her. "Where's your mama?" The girl climbed up the steps. She was challenging the world. She was groat. She's drubbing the left in the first how. She was shift and stay when. I come down the par. The girl climbed up the steps. She was real. I could see her breath in the cold. She had blonde hair pulled back with a cloth ribbon, and her shoes were old leather, scuffed up. "My name's Emma Ray," she said, quiet and polite. "I live just up the road in the old house. My mama said to catch the bus here." I should have questioned it, should have called. The district office confirmed a new student. But it was freezing. This child was alone in the dark, and my job is to get kids safely to school. I let her on. "Come sit up here by me where it's warm," I said, and she did. Sat right in the front seat across from me, folded her hands in her lap, real proper-like. I continued the route, picking up the rest of my kids. Emma Ray didn't talk much, just looked out the window. The other kids got on, walked past her, didn't say hello. That struck me as odd. Usually kids notice a new student right away. But I figured maybe she was shy, or they were half asleep. We got to school at 7:35. I opened the door, kids filed off. I turned to Emma Ray to tell her I'd help her find the office, get her registered. She was gone. The seat was empty. I checked the whole bus, nothing. I radioed the school. "Did a little blonde girl get off my bus?" They said no. I described her. They said no one like that came in. I told myself she must have slipped off when I wasn't looking. Kids are quick. But that night, I got a call from my supervisor, Jim Hendricks. He'd reviewed the camera footage. Said I spent the whole morning drive talking to an empty seat. Said I opened the bus door at an inactive stop for no reason. Asked if I was feeling okay, if I needed to see a doctor. I formatted myself. He was right. The camera showed me talking, smiling at nobody. The seat stayed empty the entire route. But I saw her. I felt her weight when she climbed on. I heard her voice. The next morning, Emma Ray was at the same stop. And she wasn't alone. A boy with her, maybe 9 years old, wearing overalls and a worn jacket. He said his name was Samuel, and he lived down the road from Emma Ray. I let them both on. They sat together, talked to each other in whispers. By the time we reached school, they were both gone again. The cameras showed me picking up nobody. Over the next 2 weeks, more kids appeared. A set of twin girls in matching dresses, a teenager boy with glasses, a tiny kid who couldn't have been more than 6, all in old-fashioned clothes, all polite, quiet, grateful for the ride. By the end of January, I was picking up 11 extra children that no one else could see. But here's the thing, they weren't invisible to me, and they weren't weightless. When they sat down, the seats compressed. When the bus went over bumps, I could see them bounce in their seats. The suspension sat lower when they were on board. I checked the tire pressure, checked the gauges. The bus was registering the extra weight. Physics doesn't lie. Something was there. Muslim, the 23 living kids, they never acknowledged the phantom children. Never looked at them, never spoke to them. It was like they existed in 2 separate worlds that only overlapped for me. I went to my doctor, told her everything. She ran tests, blood work, brain scan, the works. Everything came back normal. No tumors, no signs of stroke, no chemical imbalances. She referred me to a psychiatrist. He said I was under stress, maybe experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations, but I wasn't schizophrenic or delusional. He couldn't explain the weight on the bus. Jim Hendricks called me into the office, said I needed to take a leave of absence. They drug tested me, came back clean. They offered early retirement. I'd lose some pension, but I could leave with dignity. I refused. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't going to let them push me out. That's when I started researching. I went to the county library, searched through old newspaper archives. Took me 3 days, but I found it. January 17th, 1958. Front page of the Wilkinson County Gazette. Tragedy on Route 7. School bus accident claims 11 young lives. Perkins. Colonization. The article said a school bus serving Route 7 crashed during an ice storm. The driver, Leonard Pitts, lost control on the bridge over Miller's Creek. The bus went through the guardrail and down into the ravine. 11 children died, ages 6 to 10. The article called it a terrible accident, an act of God, black ice on the bridge. But I kept digging, found an editorial from 2 weeks later, written by a local pastor. He questioned the official story, said the crash happened at 7:15 a.m. when the road should have been salted, said Pitts had been warned about drinking on the job before. The editorial disappeared from the next week's paper, and the pastor's name never appeared in print again. 1983. Died peacefully at age 71, retired with full pension in 1958 after the unfortunate accident. No mention of fault, no mention of charges. I tracked down one of the families, Emma Ray Pritchard, the first little girl I'd seen. He was in his 50s now, still lived in the county. I called him, told him I drove a school bus and was researching the 1958 crash. He got quiet. "Why are you asking about that?" he said. I think I've seen something. On my route." Another long silence. Then, "My grandma died last year. Her whole life she blamed herself. She was Emma Ray's older sister, see? She was supposed to ride the bus that day, but she stayed home sick. Emma Ray went alone. Grandma said she felt like Emma Ray was still waiting for her, still on that route." The phantom children started talking to me more. They asked questions. Why did the school look different? Why did cars look so strange? Emma Ray asked when her mama was coming to pick her up. Samuel asked if the bus was safe today, if the bridge was okay. They didn't know they were dead. Every morning, they got on the bus, rode towards school, and somewhere along the route, right when we crossed the bridge over Miller's Creek, they disappeared. Reset. The next morning, they'd be at their stops again, waiting. They were stuck in a loop, 66 years of riding the same route, never reaching school, never going home. I tried everything. I talked to them, told them gently what had happened. They didn't understand. When I crossed the bridge each morning, newly reinforced, safe, they got quiet and scared. Then they'd vanish. In late February, I got a notice. The old Miller's Creek Bridge was scheduled for demolition in March, finally being replaced after decades of patching and repairs. The The new bridge would be built 50 yards downstream. I realized if the physical location was destroyed, the children might be freed, or they might be trapped forever, their loop tied to a bridge that no longer existed. That's when Samuel spoke to me clearly for the first time. It was a Friday morning, March 8th. He sat in the front seat and looked at me with old, tired eyes. "Mr. Neese," he said, "we know what happened now. We remember the cold water. We remember Mr. Pitts smelling funny. We've been riding this bus for so long. We're so tired. Can you help us go home?" I asked how. Emma Ray said, "We need to finish the ride. The real ride. The one that went wrong." What they meant. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. It was insane. But they kept asking. All 11 of them. Every morning. "Please, Mr. Neese, we want to go home." On Friday, March 15th, I made my decision. I picked up my regular 23 students, drove them safely to school like always. Then I radioed dispatch that I was taking the bus back to the yard for maintenance. Instead, I drove back toward Route 7. It was snowing. Real snow, rare for Mississippi in March. But there it was, thick, white flakes. Just like 1958. The 11 children were waiting at their stops. I picked them up. They knew what I was doing. Some were excited. "Are we going home?" Emma Ray asked. Others were terrified. Samuel said, "Mr. Neese, please be careful. The bridge gets icy." I drove toward Miller's Creek Bridge. My hands shook on the wheel. The snow came down harder. The road got slick. I could feel the bus sliding slightly. The children were singing now, an old song I didn't recognize. Their voices filled the bus. I accelerated. Not much, but enough. The children screamed, some in joy, some in fear. At the last second, I hit the brakes, hard. The bus skidded on the snowy road, fishtailed, slammed into the bridge railing at an angle. Metal screeched. The railing held. It had been reinforced since 1958. The bus stopped, nose against the rail, teetering. But we didn't go over. I was sobbing, shaking. The children were crying, hugging each other. Then silence. Emma Ray looked at me. Her eyes were different, aware, present. "We crashed," she whispered. "We remembered. It was so cold. The water was so cold." One by one, they understood. They could see the present now. They saw the date on my phone display, 2024. They understood they'd died. They understood they'd been trapped. They could finally let go. They faded slowly, waving goodbye. Samuel was last. "Tell our families it wasn't their fault," he said. "Tell them we're okay now." I was alone in the damaged bus. I called it in. Single vehicle collision, no injuries, driver error. They said I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. I was fired within a week. Reckless driving, destruction of county property, unauthorized use of a school bus. No pension after 22 years. The union wouldn't fight for me. What I did was indefensible. I'm 51 years old, broke, unemployed, living with my daughter now. I work at a grocery store, stocking shelves at night. But I tracked down the families of those 11 children. Most didn't want to talk about it. The tragedy was buried too deep. But 3 families listened. I told them what their relatives said. One believed me. Emma Ray's nephew cried and thanked me. The old bridge was demolished in April. The new one has a small plaque. In memory of 11 children lost in 1958. No names, no details. I visit sometimes. I swear I can hear children laughing, but it sounds happy now. Free. I lost everything. My job, my savings, my reputation. But those children aren't riding that route anymore. They're home. And some mornings when I'm stocking shelves before dawn, I smell chalk dust and old leather shoes, and I know they remember me too. My name is Jessica Tran, and I've been a rural route carrier for the United States Postal Service for 6 years. I drive the same 87 miles every single day, serving 127 mailboxes scattered across the farmland outside Meridian, Mississippi. Rain, snow, heat, doesn't matter. The mail always goes through. I know every pothole on County Road 19, every dog that'll chase my truck, every retired farmer who times their day around my arrival at 2:47 p.m. After 6 years, my route is burned into my brain like a map. I could drive it blindfolded. Knew something was wrong the moment I saw the extra mailbox. It was March 2024, a Thursday morning. The kind of beautiful spring day that makes you forget Mississippi has any other season. I'd already hit stops 41, 42, and 43. The Henderson Farm, the empty lot where the old church used to be, and the Morrison place with the 3 German shepherds. Between 43 and 44, there's a 2-mile stretch of nothing, just open farmland on both sides, fields that get planted with soybeans every year. I've driven past that land 1,000 times. But that morning, there was a mailbox standing at the edge of the road. Not a new mailbox. This thing looked ancient, rusted metal, the kind people had back in the 50s or 60s. The red flag was up. Outgoing mail. Slowed down, confused. There was no house, no driveway, no structure of any kind, just empty fields stretching back toward a tree line about half a mile away. The mailbox sat there on a wooden post like it had always been there, like I was crazy for not remembering it. I stopped the truck and got out. The metal was cold under my fingers, rough with rust. The flag creaked when I lowered it. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed paper, handwritten address in careful cursive. The postmaster, Meridian, MS. No return address, no stamp. I should have just taken it and moved on. Missing stamps happen. But something about the paper, the way it felt old and fragile, made me curious. I opened it. The letter inside was dated March 15th, 1959. Please tell my family I'm still here. Please tell them I didn't leave. Something won't let me leave. I've been trying to mail this letter for so long. Please help me. Caroline Sykes. My hands started shaking. This had to be a prank. Someone's idea of a joke. Plant a fake old letter, get the mail carrier all worked up. But the paper felt genuinely old, and the ink was faded in a way that's hard to fake. I took the letter with me and finished my route in a daze. That afternoon, I reported it to my supervisor, Tom Chen. He's been with USPS for 23 years and doesn't get excited about anything. I showed him the letter and told him about the mailbox. There's no active address at that location, he said, checking his computer. According to our records, there's never been a delivery point there. Not in my time. Not before. So what do I do with the letter? Ignore the mailbox. If it's on federal right-of-way, you can remove it. Probably some bored kid playing games. But I couldn't ignore it, because the next morning when I reached that spot, there was another letter in the box. March 16, 1959. I can hear them outside. They're looking for me. But they won't find me because the house isn't here anymore. How can I be somewhere that doesn't exist? Please, if anyone reads this, help me. Caroline. The day after that, March 17, 1959. The day after that, March 18. Every morning, a new letter. Sequential dates from 65 years ago, all from Caroline Sykes, all begging for help, all describing being trapped in the house that isn't there anymore. Southeast researching during my lunch breaks. Caroline Sykes was real. I found a newspaper article from March 1959 in the Meridian Library's digital archives. Local woman missing, foul play not suspected. Caroline Sykes, 19 years old, disappeared on March 14, 1959. She was engaged to be married to Gerald Pritchard, a local businessman's son. The article said she'd probably run away, gotten cold feet about the wedding. But these letters didn't sound like someone who'd run away. They sounded like someone who died and couldn't leave. After 2 weeks of collecting letters, I tried something. I put mail into the box, just junk mail addressed to occupant. When I came back the next day, the mail was still there, but it hadn't been touched. It just sat in the box like it was waiting. Then the next day, it was gone, and there was a new outgoing letter. Thank you for trying, but I can't receive anything. I can only send. I'm trying to reach someone who remembers me. Is anyone still looking? Caroline. I found her niece through Facebook, Martha Sykes Coleman, 71 years old, living in Jackson. I called her, expecting her to hang up on me like I was crazy. Instead, she started crying. Aunt Caroline wouldn't have run away, Martha said. I was only 6 when she disappeared, but I remember her. She was happy. She loved Gerald. Everyone said she got scared and ran, but I never believed it. Something happened to her. I think something did, I said, and I think she's trying to tell us what. That's when I noticed the mailbox was moving. On Monday of the 3rd week, the mailbox was at mile marker 43, where it had been since the beginning. Tuesday, I found it at mile marker 39. Wednesday, mile marker 31. It was traveling backward along my route, following my path home. The letters changed too. You're the first person who's read my letters. You're the first person who tried to help. Please don't abandon me like everyone else did. I'm so alone. I can see you when you stop at my box. You're real. Please stay real. I stopped sleeping well. Every morning, I'd drive my route with my heart pounding, wondering where the mailbox would be. Every evening, I'd check my driveway, terrified I'd see it there. On Friday, I did. Rusted mailbox stood at the end of my driveway, next to my own blue mailbox. The flag was up. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes before I could make myself get out. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was addressed to me, just Jessica Tran, in that same careful handwriting. I need you to find where they buried me. I need someone to know I didn't run away. I was murdered. He killed me and buried me on his property. Then he built over the grave so no one would find me. The house is gone now, but I'm still there, under where the foundation was. Please dig me up. Please tell everyone I didn't abandon my family. Please free me. Caroline. Below that were directions, detailed, specific directions to a location on my route, the empty farmland where the mailbox had first appeared. I drove there the next morning, my day off. The land was exactly as she'd described, flat, empty, with old broken concrete visible in places through the grass. Foundation remnants. I checked property records at the county office. A house had stood there from 1920 to 1987 when it was demolished. The property had been owned by the Pritchard family, Gerald Pritchard's family. I found another newspaper article from September 1959. Gerald Pritchard had married a woman named Dorothy Hayes 6 months after Caroline disappeared. I called the police. They didn't want to hear it. Letters from a ghost isn't exactly compelling evidence. But I kept pushing, kept calling, kept showing them the property records and the newspaper articles and the letters themselves. Finally, a detective named Sarah Morrison agreed to bring a ground-penetrating radar unit out to the site. But if we don't find anything, you need to let this go, she said. I stood there on that empty farmland on a cold Tuesday morning in April while they ran the GPR over the ground. Detective Morrison watched the screen, her expression slowly changing. There's something here, she said quietly. Soil disruption consistent with a burial. About 6 feet down. Confiscated team the next day. I took a personal day from work to be there. It took them 4 hours of careful digging. They found her at 6 feet. Skeletal remains, female, age appropriate for a young adult. They'd need dental records to confirm identity, but Detective Morrison looked at me with something between awe and disbelief. How did you know? She asked. I didn't answer. I was staring at the edge of the excavation site. Xiaomi stood there, young, maybe 19, wearing a pale blue dress from the 1950s. She was translucent, like looking through water. Caroline. She was smiling, tears running down her face, mouthing, "Thank you," over and over. Then her expression changed, her "tell me about me" turned. A man in his 40s stood behind me, holding the shovel,
raised over his head like a weapon. I'd never seen him before, but his face had the same sharp features I'd seen in the old newspaper photo of Gerald Pritchard. I screamed and threw myself sideways. The shovel came down, missing my head by inches, slamming into the ground. Detective Morrison and 2 officers tackled him before he could swing again. He fought them, screaming, "You can't do this! You can't destroy my family! We've protected this secret for 65 years. She was a whore who deserved what she got." They arrested him, James Pritchard, Gerald's grandson. At the station, he broke down completely. His grandfather had confessed on his deathbed. Gerald had killed Caroline when she threatened to call off the wedding after discovering he'd been hitting her during their engagement. He'd buried her on his family's property and demolished the house 30 years later to make sure no one would ever look there. The case was reopened as a homicide. Caroline's remains were returned to her family for a proper burial. I attended the funeral. Martha hugged me for a long time, crying, thanking me for giving her family closure after 65 years of not knowing. During the service, I saw Caroline one more time. She stood at the back of the chapel with an older couple, her parents, I thought, also dead now. She looked at me and waved. Just a small wave, like saying goodbye to a friend. Then they were gone. The local news picked up the story. Mail carrier solves 65-year-old cold case. I got letters of commendation from USPS and the police department. For about 2 weeks, I was a minor celebrity. But I couldn't drive past that location without having panic attacks. Couldn't stop thinking about James Pritchard coming at me with that shovel. I started carrying pepper spray, started taking self-defense classes twice a week. And then, the other mailboxes started appearing. First one at mile marker 57. Rusted, old, appearing overnight. Another outgoing letter, dated 1973, from someone named Michael Torres, who disappeared from the area. Then one at mile marker 12. Then one at marker 68. Phoneland so far. 4 more people who vanished decades ago, trying to send letters, trying to tell someone what happened to them. I reported them. My supervisor told me to ignore them. Vandalism, pranks. Don't let yourself get obsessed. But I can't ignore them. I've started reading every letter, researching every name. I found 3 more potential murder victims. The police won't investigate without more evidence than ghost letters. My girlfriend says I'm obsessed, that this isn't healthy. She's probably right. We're talking about breaking up. She says I care more about dead people than about her. Maybe I do, because these people have no one else. I'm the only person they can reach. I'm their last hope for being remembered.
For justice, for someone knowing they didn't just disappear, that someone took them, killed them, buried them. So I keep driving my route. I keep reading the letters. I keep researching. I keep pushing police to investigate. And every morning, I check my mirrors, watching for cars that follow too long. I keep the pepper spray in my pocket and the doors locked. Because James Pritchard wasn't the only person with family secrets to protect. I'm terrified one of the others will come after me too. The mail always goes through, even from the dead, especially from the dead.